Thanks for joining us for the Scaling Journeys panel. We have with us Kate Kellogg, CEO of EA Studios, Chris Carvalho, who's a board member at Roblox, early at Kabam, COO over there, and Kun, founder and CEO of Crunchyroll, who's now running a portfolio company. Please come join me up on stage. So, Chris, you're now in the Roblox board seat. You've observed their journey for quite a while. I think they should be all working. Tell us a little bit. You've been at Kabam super early. What is it like being in the ringer with the game studio early on and going through the journey?
Well, Kabam was just a crazy time. I started when we were 25 guys, literally over a dim sum restaurant in Mountain View on Castro Street, and we caught fire. We went from 25 people to over 200 people in our first year, and eventually to over 700 people in 4 years, and from 0 to 360 million in revenue. And as you can imagine, that's just like your hair is constantly on fire. You're breathing through a fire hose. At the time, this is when free-to-play was just really starting, and we had to come up with a lot of frameworks to figure out lifetime value. At the time, people did not think about lifetime value, and we had to really think about how do we spend our marketing? Do you do a big bang, or do you do it over time? All that stuff playing together. But the hardest part was just, how do you maintain a culture? And it was really almost impossible for us to maintain a culture when you grow that fast. And I think that's probably the most important thing as you're, thinking among your own company and how you're going to grow, is how do you keep that imprint of who you are and what you want your culture to be together? Because that's crucial to fast forward the business going forward.
Thank you. Kun, you've been part of the founding team and ran Crunchyroll for a long time. Now you've done it with actually 2 portfolio companies. And how would you classify kind of the breakpoints and stages of the company journey as you're thinking back?
Yeah, so I think with Crunchyroll, in hindsight, it's pretty obvious what the stages were, and it's basically what helped drive the company from 0 to 1 versus 1 to 10 and then onwards. And for Crunchyroll, it was 3 phases. The first phase was really one that was very product-led. And the reason for that was because, and if you don't know the history of Crunchyroll, when we started, we were basically like a YouTube for anime content. And people would upload their anime, and then other people would watch it. Now, our competitor was other like piracy sites or BitTorrent. And so we needed to have a product that was better, more convenient, easier to use than any other alternative out there, including YouTube. And that's how we were able to get users and solve really the chicken and egg when it comes to content and users. So that was kind of the first phase. And the second phase, once we had all these users, it was like, okay, well, we actually needed to go license the content because it was all user uploaded. How do we do that? And that phase was the company became very sales-driven or licensing-driven, if you will. And we basically needed to make sure to do whatever it took to get the licenses, one of the most important being, say, Naruto. And so that point was, okay, what do the licensors need? And whatever they wanted, we're willing to bend over backwards to make sure we get the license, because that was the only way to move forward. And once we've secured essentially a critical mass of anime licenses, the next phase was really, I would say, very business-driven, which was, okay, we know the core business model is subscription. We know, what are the metrics for CAC and like LTV, and how much should we charge per subscriber? How do we manage churn? And so it was more about, okay, how do you run that as a business? How much do you deploy on marketing? How much do you spend on content? How do you do your programming strategy and all those kinds of things? So I think each of those steps logically was kind of whatever was the success needed to drive the company to the next level, and that was kind of the break points and how what it took to run the company and what you focus on and where the decision making comes from.
Amazing. Kate, you've been part of many amazing organizations with so many moving parts, so many parts of value creation, value capture. What are kind of some of the obstacles and challenges when you're at that scale, and perhaps what can some of the earlier stage companies learn from that?
I think there's a big part of that that starts, whatever your size of organization, that you have a super crisp vision of what you're trying to do. And I think actually y'all both just talked about really crisp visions of where you wanted to go, what you wanted to accomplish. And then within that, inevitably as your company grows, you have new pillars that pop up. But what's really key is that you hold that vision and you make sure it's consistent. Make it pithy, make it marketing if you can. You gotta use the same language so you're constantly testing yourself against, are we doing what we set out to do? I think that's really critical in this while allowing the space for new ideas to come in. But the crisper you are on your vision and then your intentional culture, which you were talking about, Chris, that helps people understand whether they want to be part of that long term, and they can go full force. Because you don't want to be arguing about what the vision is, right? Like that's not making the company better. It's like going after that big target. And I think that holds true whether you're very early stage or at a global scale.
Let's stay on culture for a moment. How do you think to build the right culture within all of the different teams? What have you seen work well, not work well? You've been in different sizes of teams, and then maybe we can piggyback that over to the others as well.
I think probably what's the most valuable from my perspective is that word intentional, is that you sit down with your early crew and you say, what kind of culture do we want? In the same way, if you're gonna have kids, you talk about like, how do we wanna raise our family? What are our values? What do we want it to feel like? I think that's connected to the vision really deeply. And to be clear on that and to say uncomfortable things. Like in some groups, it's really important to be very flat and very organic and not have hierarchy. That can mean differences in the pace at which you move, right? And so there are costs for any choice in culture. And the more specific and individuated you can be, it helps people opt into that.
And I think a big part of it too is how you communicate it. And as you grow, you communicate it differently. When you're a very young startup, you communicate, you probably have a company meeting every week. Everyone in the company is literally in a room and you can ask questions and people can really get direct feedback. But then as you grow, you know, maybe the C team is only talking to the senior leadership layer, right? And they have to communicate down. So you have to communicate and find ways that there's a consistent message about what you're doing all the way from every employee, all the way up to the board. And then eventually, you know, if you're portraying how you are attacking the market externally, all that has to have a consistency to it, but it's different methods of communicating. And getting that right is critical, because if you don't, then people start misunderstanding each other and you get into conflict, which does not help you build your business.
Yeah, I think for us, the first, say, 20 employees was actually quite easy for us to not be like deliberate, because we're like, hey, we're just gonna go find more anime fans that wanna work here. And then it's like, all the engineers seem to love anime, cool, we'll just hire them. And so it was easier to not be deliberate, which actually I think hurt us in the long run. But the first like 20 people, it's like they're friends or friends of friends, and everyone loved anime. And so you know, we would all just have lunch and dinner together like every day, just hang out every day. So a lot of that culture was pervasive, but not necessarily written down. And so it just, you know, a lot of times we're like, you know, if it's not broke, don't fix it, because we're engineers. And then all of a sudden when we started getting, you know, like to, you know, 75 people, then to 150 people, then it's like, oh crap, like it's starting to break. Like, what do we do? How do we actually make sure there's a culture fit? Well, we never wrote it down. And so I think once you start getting beyond like a flat organization, it's so important to put those things down, to make sure you're deliberate about what your culture actually is, to write it down, because a lot of times when like you're in a small organization, a lot of it is like, what is the decision making? Like, how do you decide? And when it's a smaller organization, then you know everyone can just huddle, or they can look to you and you can say, okay, well, I think this way. But culture is really one of those things where it's about, okay, how do you help people to make those decisions when you're not in the room, because you know they need to decide as if they were you, or you know make the right decisions. And so you need to make sure that if you weren't in the room, you know how should they be thinking about the business? And culture kind of is one of the ways to like instill that down to everyone, so that you don't need to be in the room for the right things to happen in the company.
I think also it's how you reward culture and people, and are they aligned with your culture? Are they acting out, or are they, you know, how do you reward that? Because that shows the whole company what is important. And so it's communication, but it's also that reward system that's so critical to imprinting that culture.
It's a very interesting one. How do you think about incentive systems to get that right?
We had a lot of just really basic stuff where every employee had an opportunity to, every quarter, nominate someone for doing an amazing job. And we had 4 or 5 core principles of what it meant to be a great Kabam team player. And you could nominate, you had to write something, and then even when we had a company of 75 people, every time we had a company meeting, there would be 5 or 6 of those that had been nominated that week, and they would read out why some team member had done such an amazing job that helped, they were up, late one night when something crashed and they figured it out, or whatever it was, they went the extra mile. And I think that celebration of teamwork and the values that you're expressing is critical to making things work.
I think there's something really powerful in there too about recognition, right? Because we always think about incentive as like compensation based, but recognition is powerful. Frequently, when you're at an early phase company, you're putting it's more than your work, right? It's your heart, it's your ideas. You want to see something beautiful come into the world. And that recognition of those contributions around like a narrative story, it becomes the mythos of the company, right? We talk about company DNA, and I think rewarding that, and I love this storytelling. I think that's amazing. But as I've gone to bigger scale, we have, like actual awards, and sometimes then compensation becomes part of it. But the recognition is so powerful. Say that's what good looks like. Because we got to be looking at that all the time. It changes, right?
Another thing that we did eventually when we got a little bit bigger is we would have lunches with, 8 or so. So you pick your all-stars, and so maybe your company's up to 100 people at this point, and you pick, maybe there's the top 20 people in the company that you feel like these guys are the driving force of it. And again, it gets back to recognition. You'd have a lunch with, 5 or 6 of them. The CEO would, I would, our head of product would, et cetera. And they would get to express their ideas and really get more one-on-one time with one of the C team. And that I think is really powerful to keep them leaning in, and also to uncover if there's anything that's uncomfortable with someone or something's not working. It's their opportunity to express, hey, have you thought about this? This doesn't seem to be working.
It's the grown-up version of pizza with a principal.
Kun, anything from your end about incentive systems, getting culture right, getting it reinforced?
Yeah, I think it's more the same, which is just like, we would have all hands, and we would just, have presentations about, like what we did right, how do we celebrate it, and then we would use that as a moment to highlight team members who made like extraordinary contributions when we're launching a product or launching a new series or launching a new region. As you grow, when you're, it's like 10 people, everyone's basically in leadership. But once you get, beyond that, we'd also, had a leadership team essentially, and those were that team was, kind of the team where you, outside of the executive team, that was the next in line to disseminate information, give them updates, bubble up ideas, and then that would also mean they get. Basically earlier access to key information that needs to be then disseminated down to the rest of the organization. And being part of that leadership was like incredibly valued. Like you wanted to be in there because that's when you knew that you were making positive contributions, you were moving in the right direction, you were doing things that was good for the organization.
Another thing that we did a little bit of is that a lot of times when people were getting promoted really quickly, we went from our first year 25 to over 200 people. So you can imagine some people actually were promoted 3 or 4 times during a year. Well, some people were amazing individual contributors, but they were not an amazing manager. And so we had training on how to become a better manager. Instead of telling someone, I want you to do this, this, and this, tell them what do you want them to accomplish and let them be creative so that they feel empowered to actually come up with ideas. And again, that's part of the culture of how there's opportunity for others, but we're also going to know and train you if you need help to become better, if you're going to be a manager or whatever that is.
That's many amazing lessons that we also can take away, with our organization. That leads me to kind of the point around talent density and when and how to grow and scale teams. At BITKRAFT, we've grown from a team of 3 to a team of 6 to 12, and now we're a little over 20, and we're globally distributed. How are you going through the decision-making process of keeping talent density high, when and how much to scale and grow teams, and then also maybe when to make calls to reduce teams and how to go about that?
It's always difficult to keep a high bar. For us, I think we actually, unfortunately, we grew so fast, our bar was probably diluted a little bit because it's just impossible when you're early stage. And so even when we were 25 and going up to 50 or so, at that point, you're still, I think you mentioned you were hiring a lot of people knew. They were anime fans, but they probably all knew each other. In your first 25, 30 hires, probably someone can vouch for every single employee and go, I've worked with that person, they're a rock star, let's go. After that, then you start having to open up the recruiting machine and you aren't as close to it. But I think as a founder, you should always, the first 50, maybe even more, you have the final say on who gets hired, and you should interview and talk to that person, at least get to know them. And I think getting your opinion on each person is important, because you're making an imprint of what the values are in the culture, and does that line up? And at the end of the day, the C team cares more about that than anyone else is ever going to care. So you should keep that imprint for as long as you can. At some point, you can't scale beyond whatever, but you could probably use that for the first 50 to 100 employees.
I think there's also something that's really important when you're at that early phase around, for any role, looking at what is going to be the most impactful part of that job. Because frequently when you're scaling, we're all imperfect people. We have things we're working on and we're trying to develop. And one of the things that can happen when you're fighting for that high bar is you look for perfection. And that it can actually, I think, lead us away to who has the highest averages across these 10 traits that we want. Personally, what I've seen really spectacular teams be developed, you look for the splinter skill. Look for that one thing that person is going to be better at than anyone else, and does that match the core of the job? And when you do that and put it together, you allow some space for people to be spectacular. At bigger orgs, frequently we need people to try and be good at all the aspects of their job, and it can be tricky, but when you build a team, if you balance it right, I think you have a real opportunity to go after these really core competencies in a way that's key, particularly at that phase.
I would say really try to justify whether you need the hire or not. I think it's very easy to think, okay, well, we're scaling something, so we have to throw more bodies at it. But sometimes you have to think about, okay, let's say as an executive, when is the right time to hire? For me, is it something that you're working on that really, really moves the needle, right? And then it's, okay, I want one ringable neck on this thing. Okay, and that person, is it someone in the company, or if it's not, because everyone's got just as critical priorities they're working on, okay, we need to go find someone to hire, and that person's responsibility is to drive this particular initiative or this particular country or this particular product, and then you can start building that out. A lot of times it's, even as you're scaling, if you're trying to hire too much, it is difficult to keep the bar high, and as you're hiring a lot, you do end up just having a lot more tax on your organization, because you need to then get people to, it takes time to assimilate people into your culture, it takes time to get them into your process, and you can only grow organically at a certain pace, because if you grow too quickly, it doesn't work at the end of the day.
I think in terms of when you need to reduce, there's I think about two vectors. First, financially, sometimes it happens, right? You get to a place where you just can't fit in the ambition with the resources you have. The second one, I would say, actually goes back to culture. When you look at, you have a strong vision and an intentional culture, you have to, within that, build feedback mechanisms, right? Because as founders, you typically have that really crisp vision, but as you grow and you develop layers, it's going to evolve a bit. Even if you're crisp, what it means at different parts of your company is going to change. So I think as you go through those feedback mechanisms, you have to look at how happy people are in their work. If they're not happy, something is wrong. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to change your structure, but you need to understand why they're unhappy and if you have a credible way to fix it. If everybody's unhappy because they're not paid enough, then I would argue that maybe you need to look at the way you're stacking your team and whether you can afford that. Employees that are happy, empowered, and feel fierce that they can go climb that mountain, you're always going to get more out of.
And just echoing on that, you know, one thing when we got a little bit bigger, the 100 or so folks, we had a biannual survey of, we call it the happiness survey, and we'd ask a range of, 10 or 15 questions, and we could determine not only by, we were in multiple locations at that point, but it was all anonymous, but you could also pick out, hey, the engineers are not very happy, or this studio, for whatever reason, is not very happy. And we would take that and we would broadcast it back to everyone in a company meeting, and then we would say, for the next quarter, our goal as founders and C-team is to fix what we think is the #1 issue that everyone had brought up. And that was really well received because it wasn't just a survey, they got a survey. We actually took that and then tried to fix one of the most important things that people said was an issue.
I think that humility, being open as a leadership team, like we hear you and we see this and we're going to take steps because we think it's important too, is so powerful. Like that really building that engagement mechanism, whether you can make it 100% better, showing that active listening and that you're showing up and trying to drive that, it's powerful. It also opens like a growth mindset for your whole team. Right? We all have things we're working on. I think when you're in leadership roles, people want to know that you have the answer, but you don't always have it. And so be willing to say, this is a hard one, we're going to go after it, and we're going to keep working on it together because we didn't get it right, is super powerful.
On that note, any lessons about kind of communication of strategy, tactics, how to make sure the team is aware of, hey, we've tried this, we're not doing this anymore, this is what we're going to do next. How do you maybe forecast potential bumps in the road and reevaluation points?
I don't think you can forecast most of the bumps. Like unexpected things happen every day. And sometimes the bumps are great. Sometimes you have talent you weren't planning to hire walk through your door and say, hey, I love your company, I want to do something. And you got to reshift because that should become a priority. I frequently encourage people, some of whom might be in this room, that when you're in a job with a lot of responsibility, no matter how big your organization is, you should have 20 to 30% of your week that could be devoted to unexpected things. Maybe it's a problem, maybe it's an opportunity, but when you have big territory that you're responsible for, that's gonna happen. And so I think being mindful of that and being able to jump on it and not say like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm gonna do, is really critical to building sustainable frames. On the strategy front, I think one of the things that I've really noted working at different size of organizations over time is the bigger you are, the crisper and more consistent you have to be. And that you can really, as you're going through this, it can start to feel really formulaic to an extent, so you have to keep tapping into what made it matter so that you can tell that story to bring people along, because for some of them, it'll be the first time they heard it.
Yeah, I think just echoing on that again is what you measure is what matters. So what ultimately you measure and you share with the organization, and part of that is educating them on what are the value drivers for the business. So in every business, there's usually 2 or 3 things that just stack to, this is going to drive our business. And if we can achieve a little bit of leverage on each of these, that's going to hit our inflection point. And so I think the more you can educate about what those value drivers are, and make sure everyone, hopefully it's just a few, because it's got to be concise, but then you can really push that out, and every time you're communicating, you're sharing how are we progressing against those. I think that's critical for everyone to be all rowing so that they go, how does my individual job affect these different metrics, and how does that help the organization? If they can understand that, it's really powerful to help push your company up.
And to echo that, we use like the Google OKR process at Crunchyroll, and we're using it at the my current startups as well, and it's incredibly scalable. It's worked really well in terms of alignment, goal setting, and just giving people transparency into what moves the needle and what they need to do to contribute to that. So in a nutshell, the process is every quarter, at the beginning of the quarter, you basically set measurable objectives of what you want to accomplish, that you want to get done at the end of the quarter. You discuss it together as a team, and then everyone agrees, signs off, and then every week you're ideally looking at it to see, well, are we making progress? What am I doing to contribute to that progress towards those goals? And then at the end of the quarter, you give yourself a grade. Hopefully, you set the goal aggressive enough that you're not, getting 1,000 batting average each time, or you're not softballing it too much. But then it's about how do you set the goals correctly. But also in that process, you're able to see, okay, what are the goals for this other department versus my department? Okay, how can I contribute to their goal, and how can they contribute to my goal? But the OKR process for us has been a great tool for that.
Amazing. We probably have time for one more question. Perhaps we do what's a conventional piece of wisdom that you disagree with, or one exciting kind of war story learning that has really imprinted on you?
I think one that I discovered along the way that I tend to repeat for people is you have a choice to not accept feedback. And feedback is always a gift. You got to hear it, take it in, and hold it. But frequently, what can make us awesome, if overused, might be a little too much, or it might not vibe for everyone. But you have a choice to not accept that feedback. What I'm thinking about something specific that happened really early in my career. I'd taken on a lot of responsibility somewhere, and I had a direct manager who was very conscious of I was one of the very few women at a senior role at a very male-dominated environment. And he said, I really think as you're trying to take on more responsibility, it's important you don't take the notes in the leadership meeting. And that was thoughtful feedback, and I appreciated it. You think about your leadership posture. And I thought about it, and I sat with it, and I went back to him, and I was like, here's the thing. The person who holds the pen is telling the story. Because I did that, I could quietly manage the whole process. I decided who was in charge. I articulated that someone had a due date that we could build into our system. And then I had a responsibility to pull people to make sure we were making that process. So it was effectively an invisible leadership role, but I said, thank you, no. And it was actually a mechanism I continue to use because it's the way I can drive things in a way while still supporting the objectives of the broader group. So just be thoughtful about the feedback you're going to take. If you jump at everyone's feedback, you become not yourself. So you want to hear it and think about it, but follow where your heart's telling you to go.
I agree. You absolutely have to understand who you are and how you communicate, how you think, and at the end of the day, you own those decisions. And I think crazily, this summer I shot a movie, and so we went from 0 employees to 100 employees for 3 months, and you get a lot of talented people, and they all have, here's what our vision is, but we've got a script, here's what we're following, but they all then take their own idea off of that. You are the ones that care more about the company and what your product is than anyone else, and for anything that's critically important, you need to basically make sure you're leaning in and also ensure that that's the quality level that you want. Because, again, you are the most caring person about the product in the company. No matter how high the talent density is, you're going to care more. So don't be ashamed or feel abashed to lean in and go, you know what, I really want it this way. I think this is a better path.
Yeah, I would say, especially early on, when it's really, really important, it's okay to do things that are not scalable, meaning that you want to roll up your sleeves to just get in there yourself. One of the things that we had to figure out early on was we were streaming shows right when they were broadcast in Japan on TV, and prime time was 7 p.m. for them there, and that would be 4 a.m. in Pacific time. And there was one important show which we wanted to make sure was available at 4 a.m., but it would require a lot of over-engineering to make sure it was secure and compliant and distributed seamlessly at 4 a.m. And so we're like, you know what, the first few times when we do this, we're just going to stay up until 4, and then we're going to press the button, and if something goes wrong, at least we'll be there to figure it out. And that worked, and lo and behold, there was another distributor at the time who didn't do that, who I think they just threw it into their FTP or something, and then they actually leaked the file before it was broadcast because they put it into some automated system that didn't account for daylight savings time or something. But yeah, in the beginning, I think especially when it's important, it's okay to roll up your sleeves and just do things that are not scalable.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. These were amazing lessons, amazing insights. Will probably help us all get better in how we do our day-to-day things. With that, we'll roll pretty quickly into the next panel. You can just drop your mic on your seats. Give it up for the